Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? I hope you're very well this fantastic Thursday evening here in South Africa, and for our international guests, or whatever time zone you're in. Um, this evening, I have the great privilege of welcoming Zwelethu to the Tools and Techniques Thursday event this evening. But before I introduce our panelists, what I'd like to just cover a couple of the ground rules and just introduce everyone to the South African chapter of the IIBA for those of you who are new. Zwelethu, if I can ask you just to move to the guidance slide. Excellent. So Zwelethu's asked if we could reserve questions during the event this evening till the end. That means that you should probably have pen and paper so that you can get the most out of this evening's event. For those of you who are familiar with it, let me just grab my copy of. The event this evening is going to be covering some of the content out of the BA book, which is the IIBA's business analysis body of knowledge. I'm looking forward to getting through it. For those of you who are new to the IIBA, we welcome you to have a look at the website, which is iiba.org, and have a look at some of the benefits of being an IIBA member, including access to the business analysis body of knowledge, but also the extensive library, which tackles all sorts of thought leadership articles, tools and techniques, and is pretty much everything you will ever need to know and stuff that you will probably never need to know, but it's still good to have in your belt anyway. Excellent. So without spending too much time on the introductions, I'd like to introduce Zwelethu. He is a Kung Fu master, and I'd like to see some demonstration of those skills later. A Scrum master, and we send him our condolences on that. And a Toastmaster, and we're looking forward to demonstration of those skills this evening. But tonight he is our BA master, and I'd like to hand over to Zwelethu.
Thank you very much, James. It's a pleasure to meet everyone here today. Today it's about requirements lifecycle. It's one of the chapters that many of us tend to not touch a lot on, or to actually dwell on the BA book. But just to give you a background, as part of the knowledge areas that the BA book touches, is you have business analysis, planning and monitoring. We have elicitation and collaboration, and the topic at hand today, which is requirements lifecycle management. There's also strategy analysis, requirements analysis and design definition, and then as well as the solution evaluation. Majority of the time, we tend to skip this baby. As you can see just on the demonstration here, that's where it is. It tends to talk a lot with the planning component of things. So as you start your endeavor as a business analyst, you will find that when you start doing your planning, you need to plan with requirements lifecycle in mind. All right. That's what we are here for at the end of the day as well. And I'll be taking you through this topic, but it's more of a topic that I'll be just touching base on my experience as well as a business analyst. Okay. What does the BA box say about this, about requirements lifecycle? Well, it describes just the tasks that the business analyst performs to manage and maintain requirements from initiation right through to the final implementation of those requirements. The picture that you're seeing is that of a cake. I always say, when you go into a store, or whatever store it is, that actually a baker, you go there with the picture of the cake that you want, and we refer to that as your need as the customer of that shop. You go there and says, this is what I would like to have as a customer. I would like my cake to be a 5-layered cake. I would like it to have a variety of the different types of sponges that it has: chocolate, vanilla, dark chocolate, and all of those things. And if you look at that, that is coming from the business or that is coming from the customer needs. And these, then the shop itself will have a recipe. They will come up and actually find and actually have a recipe to actually to be able to bake this cake for you. And what we tend to miss sometimes, it can is a recipe can easily be misplaced. So hence it is important to have a record and be able to manage the requirements that are being received from the customer itself and be able to implement the right recipe for what the customer wants. Okay, so in terms of the introduction, as I already said, requirements lifecycle, it begins with the presentation of the business need as a requirement, continues through the development of a solution, and ends when the solution is and ends when a solution and the requirement that represents it are retired. So you find that in different companies, we as business analysts we tend to reuse some of this information or the requirements, but we'll go through that later on and as the presentation goes. So this knowledge area, so these are the key knowledge areas that are covered as part of the requirements lifecycle. You have trace requirements, we have maintain requirements, we have prioritize requirements, we have assess requirements, and then we have approve requirements. If you look at the kind of a flow of things, whenever you will see, when I've listed them, I've started with trace, maintain, prioritize, assess. But in majority of the time in practice, we assess requirements. By assessing requirements, it could be new requirements, it could be a change into existing requirements. We look and then we bring those forward to say, hey, you know what? Do we proceed with these or do we not proceed with these? This is not a potential requirements. After the assessment, we go back and then we refine. We say no, it is a potential requirement. Then we move on to the approval or where we reach the consensus of a requirement. So you see, I've jumped from assess to approve, and then from there onwards, yes, we reach the consensus. Then from here onwards, we trace those requirements. That forms the part where we are managing these requirements that we've already gathered. We are tracing the requirements, we are maintaining the requirements, we are also prioritizing the requirements. All right, and then from here, what are trace requirements? Again, we'll always rely on the book that James showed you. Here, it's all about gaining an understanding of why requirements are traced, as well as learning the key element of traceability that a business analyst should consider. So again, relying on the BA box, trace requirements is to ensure that requirements and designs at different levels are aligned to one another and manage to affect the change to one level or related requirements. Okay, that's where we are at trace, and then we go in depth in terms of trace requirements. We say in trace requirements, traceability, what does traceability enable you as a business analyst? Traceability enables faster and simpler impact analysis. It's more reliable discovery and discovery of inconsistencies and gaps in requirements, deeper insight into the scope and complexity of a change. As you remember, we started with assess requirements, so we are able to look at the scope and the complexity of a change, and a reliable assessment of which requirement have been addressed and which ones have not been addressed. So as you can see, what usually does, if you look at from a value chain perspective or from a process traceability, you'll find that there's a value chain. From that value chain, we take a business process. From the business process, then there is a sub process, and from that sub process, we have an activity, then a task. In each and every layer here, as we are going on, when it comes to process, to a process itself, we are able to trace the requirements. Where did the requirement come from? So we are able to move from task to activity to sub-process up until the value chain itself. But if we take an example of in a software requirements traceability, we have a business need, there is a business requirement, there is a stakeholder requirement, then there is a solution requirements. And that's where now the good old design and code and test comes in. Those are just forming part of the development life cycle. But in terms of being able to trace this requirement, right from the solution requirement itself back to the need of the client, this is what trace gives you. The ability to trace the requirements, this is what gives you. A lot of you might have worked with something called traceability, traceability matrix. That is a technique that you might use, or a repository that you might use. But as you'll see earlier on, what are the differences, what are the other tools, or are the other items that are there when it comes to traceability? Okay. What are the elements of traceability? There are three elements to consider when you're looking at tracing of requirements. It's the level of formality, it's the relationship amongst the requirements themselves, but most importantly, the traceability repository. I just spoke about now the traceability matrix. That kind of forms part of where you will get the traceability. It forms part of the traceability repository. We'll start with the level of formality. I usually talk about here when it comes to trace to level of formality. The level of formality is determined by the value of a particular type of a link or trace. So you need to ask yourself the information, what type of information that you'll be linking. But the most important thing to note here, the more the requirements are being managed, the more formal the requirement, the traceability would become. I'll give an example here. For example, if you are a person who hikes like me, if you're going to be just hiking a short trip, or you're going to be doing a short hike, the level of preparedness and the level of formality in terms of you preparing for that hike is going to be different when you are hiking, for example, a Mount Kilimanjaro, or you are hiking a very long hike from, take an example, from Platteklip Gorge, you're hiking all the way up to Cape Point, for example. You know that you need to prepare, you need to have the right gear. It goes back to the level of formality that you have to actually implement when it comes to your requirements as well. If you bring it back to requirements, what do you need in terms of ensuring the detail that you require, and how to trace, and how to put all these requirements together in terms of tracing them. That's the element one. Element two is the relationships. I'm sure many of you have worked on Jira, or some have worked on Jira. You'll find that in Jira, there is these relationship management in Jira, where it talks about a requirement that is derived from one requirement, a ticket that is dependent on another ticket, or a ticket that's or a Jira story that satisfies another one, and then this other one will validate another one. The same applies. Basically, the structure, that is a structure of requirements. You find that a requirement, there is a relationship between two requirements. This is when a requirement is derived from one to the other. So in the case of a solution, requirement might be derived from a stakeholder requirement. And if you remember, as I showed you the linearity of the relationships, I said we have a stakeholder requirement that then that connects to a solution or to a solution requirement. But in other cases, we have depends where the requirement or the relationship between two requirements is dependent on each other. So this is when one requirement depends on the other. So here you find that there are two types of conditions in terms of dependence. There's a necessity, as well as there's the effort component of that depend requirement. So what necessity, you have to have this requirement fulfilled in order for you to move on to the next requirement. Without this requirement, this will never be fulfilled. If we were to provide a solution to a customer, or to a web page in software development, you will find that you cannot say we have fulfilled a requirement by only providing the back end of a application. You might find that we have a dependence in terms of the front end, and for the front end to be functional, we need the back end to be functional as well. There's a tight dependence on the other one. You have satisfied the relationship between an implementation element and the requirement it satisfies. An example here has an implementation solution satisfy the need to allow an applicant to complete an online application securely according to the standard or to the company standard, for example. So that's another example of a relationship or the types of relationships that you need to be able to trace when you're doing your tracing of requirements. There's one requirement that might be validating another requirement again. So this is a relationship between requirements and the test case, and other elements that validate the requirement that has been fulfilled with the solution that has been provided. Right. And then traceability repositories. Everyone tends to, when they come to this part of the chapter, which is chapter 5 in the BA book, when it comes to this chapter, people tend to skip to the part where they say, oh, you know what, we need to do a traceability matrix. But of course, requirements need to be traced. You need to document your requirements and maintain in line with the method and tools identified by your business approach. If you remember, whenever we were doing your planning and monitoring right before we start our analysis, we need to put this up front. And whenever we are going to have the approach, we need to state upfront that this is how we are going to be able to manage and document our requirements. Many organizations today manage traceability using elaborate spreadsheets. That's where your traceability matrix comes in. Back in the day, we used to use a spreadsheet to show to do the traceability. In our days, there are sophisticated software requirement management software tools like Confluence. Many might be aware of Confluence as a tool that you are able to link a Confluence page into your Jira board. And also there's other tools as well, like Zoho, that also provides the same requirements repository or traceability repository as well that are available out there for your projects. So when it comes to traceability, it gets quite sophisticated depending on the type of organization as well as the requirements that are there. For a startup might have a spreadsheet, and that would be sufficient. But for other organizations, they might have this sophisticated software like Confluence or Zoho, and there's many other software requirement management software out there. Okay. Then the next task that we have is manage. From trace, we go now to maintain requirements. And then according to the IIBA again, we need to retain requirements accuracy and consistency throughout and beyond the change during the entire requirements lifecycle to support the reuse of requirements in the solution. Okay. So it is important to be able to ensure that your requirements are maintained and they maintain their accuracy, because what will happen in the future, you will actually be required to reuse your requirements. Again, what are the elements for this section? The three elements: there is the maintenance of the requirements, there's the maintenance of the attributes, and then there's the reuse of requirements. Remember, we talked about the accuracy of your requirements. So you need to ensure that your requirements throughout the life cycle, they are maintained. As you may know, if you want your car to continue to move forward, you want your car to be able to take you from point A to point B, you need to ensure that you check your oil. You need to ensure that you've checked your spark plugs, your timing belt. You don't want to be stuck on a highway somewhere, and all in the name that you did not maintain your vehicle. The same applies with requirements. You need to ensure that you maintain your requirements, you keep them up to date, especially if I make an example from the compliance world where there are regulations that might come up. The introduction of the NCA at one point, the introduction of the POPIA at another point as well. So all those would form part of your regulatory requirements that you would need to maintain. Whenever there's amendments to legislation, you are able to make amendments. Or even one of the examples that I like to use a lot is the FATCA, which is a legislation that comes from the United States, that has to do with tax as well as the IRS. You'll find that there are people who are South African who are reporting into the IRS. Whenever there's update, you need to make sure that you maintain your requirements with the regulatory requirements that are coming from the United States. So maintenance, again, as I said, you maintain for accuracy. Make sure that your requirements are well named and accessible to your shareholders. I spoke about Confluence earlier on, the share drive as well, that you might be able to place your requirements for easy access. Most important thing, you maintain your relationships and the relevant information to ensure that the contact and the original intent of the requirements are maintained. And I would like to stress it is important to maintain the original intentions of your requirement and make sure that that is maintained. You know what this requirement was about, such that there is no confusion later on whenever there is a new requirement that comes in that will actually cause ambiguity in the requirement itself, or that will cause conflict. You are able to identify the intent of that requirement, and the change that is coming in, is it in clash or is it in conflict with the intention that was put in place. Right. The other attribute, it is maintain attributes. I find this to happen a lot. I think we had a session, the IBA had a session last week, and our speaker was talking about the integration between two components or two elements that were being bought by Eskom, which is our power supply provider in South Africa, where they bought turbines that are being coupled with other components. And one of the biggest things that came into my mind for me was maintenance of attributes is very important. You need to ensure that whenever there is a change, or whenever there is an introduction or any integration that might come up, ensure that the attributes that are being called by one system that is communicating with another system, they are maintained. You don't want to all of a sudden see an attribute that you had last referred to as login is now changed to log on. And that's one of the most biggest mistakes that will happen, that causes issues and error. So it is important to make sure that your requirements remain the same. For example, so make sure that the attributes are clear. Okay. And then the next one, it is the reuse of requirements. When we talk to requirements here, this is my favorite, because I think we were joking earlier on that when you become a senior citizen, or when you become a senior business analyst, you tend to know that you have been this road before. You know that you are building a new payment system. What does that payment system require? You are capturing a client's data. You need to ensure that you are compliant with POPIA. If you are in a credit environment, you need to ensure that you are compliant with the National Credit Act in the South African context. So you need to ensure that you do not need to be going and researching and starting all over again. You can reuse requirements, especially when the situation is similar to what you're doing. When the initial requirement that was put in place for one application is transferred to another application, you are able to say, you know what, I can reuse compliance requirements. I can reuse policies and standards. I can reuse performance requirements and reporting requirements for the specific dashboard that I've created. I can also use the similar dashboard, because the informational requirements that are forming part of what I'm doing are leading me to the same place. Therefore, I can reuse my reporting requirements. Okay, so that is the elements that we have when it comes to maintaining of requirements. Then this is now where the Scrum Master part of me sometimes will come in, where we have to negotiate priorities, because hey, you know what happens here. if you do not prioritize, it can get messy. But according to the BA book, the purpose of the task is just to prioritize requirements, to rank the requirements in order of relevant importance. But why are we doing this? We're doing this because um, if we do not prioritize, what is the opposite of not prioritizing? It's cancel, disorder, disorganized, dispersed, forgotten, let go, scattered, and all of that. So it is important to prioritize your requirement. Ensure that your requirement are ordered in a fashion that you are able to easily access them. You are able to follow your requirements. And in a backlog scenario, the same applies there. Whenever you're going to have a backlog, it is always emphasized to product owners that ensure that your requirements are ordered and your requirements are prioritized in terms of priority, in terms of value to the customer. Right. So that's the prioritize of requirements. And then when it comes to the elements of prioritizing requirements, we look at the basis of prioritization. We look at the challenges of prioritization. We look at the continual prioritization. All right, basis of prioritization. This I like. I like what happened here because the other day HSBC was fined. It was fined a lot of money. I think 63.9 million by the financial regulator for unacceptable failings and of anti-money laundering. I know some of you might be in the regulatory space as business analysts in the regulatory space, where there is quite a lot of emphasis on anti-money laundering. And if you do not prioritize your AML, your anti-money laundering structures or your requirements, you will then see yourself in the same situation. But most important thing, the impact of not prioritizing is you'll end up getting fined, but the most thing that companies don't like is the reputation that that is associated with not having prioritized your requirements carefully. So what are the factors that influence prioritization? It is the benefits, it is the penalties, as I spoke about, it is the cost, sometimes the opportunity cost, it is the risk in terms of example, fraud prevention, it is the dependencies, it is the time sensitivity of that requirement. Hence, this requirement needs to put up front. And if you remember, when it comes to trace requirements, we spoke about the relationship that requirements have. You'll find that this requirement is a dependency on another requirement or another project. As a result, this time sensitivity, this stability. I spoke about regulatory as well as policy compliance as well. In the South African context, you'll find that if you look at a country as an organization, South Africa has been placed on the grey list again for not ensuring compliance is done and not prioritizing the regulatory requirement of ensuring that you do put in place anti-money laundering policies upfront as a country. So that is the element one of the basis of prioritization. And then the challenges of prioritization. I kind of like this one because there's always clashing goals. As the Dolbert says here, this is taken from the BA world. We say we have these goals here: world peace, finding true happiness, the perfect sandwich. But the real thing is all about prioritizing the client's goal, not your own goals in this case. So each stakeholder may value each different aspects of their requirements. And set and requirements set and have different motivation for supporting certain requirements to have high priority of the implementation. This can cause a conflict among stakeholders. One of the things that I always throw in here on my side having the Scrum Master experience is always to have a working agreement. As a collective of stakeholders, it is important to have a working agreement that will serve as a vision for us as a group, whatever it is that we're doing, so that we know that our requirements must meet the vision of what we're doing. And of course, you need, as a business analyst, to be able to negotiate in terms of priority, as previously stated. If there is, for example, a regulatory requirement, that is the FERCA regulation that needs to be put in place, but you also have another conflicting requirement, which is in another prioritized requirement, which is the NCA, for example. In the South African context, you know that the one that you prioritize between the two regulations would be the NCA, if you are in the credit space, because not all your clients will be reporting their tax through the IRS of the United States. Therefore, the highest priority between the two will be your National Credit Act in the South African context. So just to give an example when it comes to that. Okay. And then continual prioritization. This again, priority, you need to prioritize continually, because priorities may change continually. For example, here, stakeholders may implement, and it might be implementation, but might initially prioritize based on certain benefits. But because the landscape changes, the implementation team may then reprioritize the requirement based on the sequence in which the requirements must be implemented due to technical constraints. You'll find that it's not only now, you find you have bought a software, you've bought a package, and you're working with the implementation partner. But what happens is that you, in example that I had at work recently, we bought a Salesforce marketing cloud, and as part of a package that Salesforce marketing cloud offers, there is an analytics component. But we are interested in the informational requirement side of things. But because we cannot implement the informational requirements component because we are waiting for there is a technical constraints that we need to purchase the module, the insights module from Salesforce. So therefore, the priority is to actually do all the other work prior to having insights built in or prioritized in terms of requirement. Again, here, this was something that was done by Capitec recently, where they've actually transformed their organizational capabilities by implementing SAP HANA that just keeps pace in the rapid growth. So that's the continual prioritization that needs to happen, because the landscape changes, and due to landscape changes, you need to be agile in your approach and be able to prioritize continually. All right, and then the other task is to assess the requirements. This is here we say, hey, what is going on? Is it a change? Is it the same thing? So, but again, as I said, is it a new thing? Whenever we start with requirements, we start with new requirements. This is now then we do our assessment as the requirement. Does the requirement need to go forward? And according to the IBA here, the purpose of assess requirement changes is to evaluate the impact and the proposed changes to the requirements and design, because that's what effectively will be impacted by the changes in the requirements. The requirements themselves, as well as the design at the end of the day, will be impacted by this. But why change? But why do we need to assess change? Because change is inevitable, and change is the only constant in life. So we have to continually make sure that we do assess changes. Okay. Cool. What are the elements for assessing change and requirements? There are three elements that the business that the business analyst needs to consider when assessing requirements. One is the formality, so it's assessment formality, impact analysis, and impact resolution. A lot of us are usually involved in impact analysis of requirements. A typical example is having a field that you need to have. For example, we'll have a drop-down value that we can implement, as well as other. So you find that the behavior of the user can be can be can be impacted by you having a drop down value as well as other. And it is natural for many users to just type in the information or the value that they want without using the drop down value. So that is one of the things that we deal with as business analysts, by looking at the impact of saying, do we remove the other option, or do we keep the drop down value as is, or look at and just do a data analysis of what has been captured by the different users of that system, and then formalize the what is common in what has been captured by the user, and just put it in the drop down value and remove the other option as well. But again, when it comes to level of formality, so is a high level of formality and a detail required when assessing a proposed change to a requirement? It goes back now to the predictive approach of requirements, or versus an adoptive approach. Again, it goes back to the world of agility versus waterfall, in a sense. Which one do you want to approach? Do you want to approach a scenario where you are, the way you're going to document your requirements, you're going to complete a BRS, you're going to ensure that you have a physical sign off of that BRS by your stakeholders. Once that BRS is been signed off, it is printed, it is signed off with a physical signature. Or you're going to take the route of having to complete user stories in a Jira board, and actually and place all your Jira stories and execute using an agile methodology when it comes to the level of formality. But I must say, in the South African context, we have the Prudential Authority. The encounters that I've had on my side was that when I worked in one of the project on my project, we had found that the Prudential Authority required that we have physically signed off BRSs, business requirements, to so that all of the information that we said we are putting in place as means to address the Prudential Authority's recommendations are captured, and they would actually have a copy of that document. So it just depends on sometimes on the type of project that you're on. Impact analysis, once again, some key factors when considering when assessing this change is to consider the benefit. Again, you are looking at the impact of not implementing your AML or following the regulators recommendation. You need to look at the benefit, the cost in terms of monetary, but also there is a cost in terms of reputation. Again, there is the impact of these requirements. Will your system crash as a result? Will your system go down as a result of this change? There's also a schedule where you have time frames when it comes to regulations. For example, I remember the implementation of debit check. There was a cutoff that business needed to get off the NADIO system for debiting clients' accounts. They needed now to move over to debit check. There was a time frame that was provided to all the different financial services providers to ensure that they are compliant with debit check. And when that time frame was elapsed, everyone needed to be on debit check. Of course, we still have some entities that are not on debit check. I'll not mention by name, but that's an example of a schedule in terms of your impact. There's the agency of the impact of your change. Again, this might be something that is coming from the PA, and in which the PA says you need to do this by this time. So it is something that is urgent. Otherwise, the result, again, coming from the HSBC example where you get fined, but most importantly for me is the reputational cost that is bigger than the actual fine itself. Impact resolution. business analyst is required to document and communicate all impact and resolution resulting from change analysis to share with all stakeholders. The stakeholders will be responsible to approve or deny the proposed changes. Again, it comes back as a business analyst, you are there to form part of that working agreement to say, guys, let's not labor the point when it comes to approving changes. We need to get to a vision and we need to get to a consensus. And usually, a lot of us deal with or encounter difficult stakeholders. The best way to resolve such a situation, it is having a working agreement. That will solve that challenge that you have with your stakeholders. As a business analyst, this is where you stand. You are here to ensure that you resolve any possible conflicts that might occur with your requirements. And then the last task, that's the last task, which is approve requirements. Again, according to the IIBA, you are obtaining an agreement on the approval of the requirements and design for business analysis work to continue and the solution to be constructed. Again, I'll go back to the Prudential Authority here, because if you do not have that document, that BRS, that was all agreed, it becomes a problem, because what was implemented versus what was required, there will be conflict between the two. So hence, you need to always obtain an agreement and approval from your stakeholders for you to be able to continue to go to solution and construction of that solution. But why? Well, it's very important to actually get an agreement. Otherwise, you'll build something for your stakeholders that they do not like. There are 4 elements here to consider when a business analyst performs the approval component of the requirements. One, it is understand the stakeholder roles, conflict and issue management, gain consensus, track and communicate the approval. I've touched based on this again prior to this, but we will go through it again, that in terms of the element 1, it is understand your stakeholders. It is one of those, as business analysts, back in the day, we used to have these coffee breaks or coffee check-ins with our stakeholders. Just sit down, understand your stakeholders, understand the role of their stakeholders, because the responsibility of the business analyst is to understand who holds the decision-making power to approve the change. The business analyst should also be aware whom to inform and consult. This goes back to the good old RACI, where you need to know who is approving, who is to be made aware, who is accountable. It is important as a business analyst to consider that there will only be a small number of stakeholders who have the authority to approve or reject requirements or change, but many stakeholders will have some level of influence into these approvals. So it's important as a business analyst to engage your stakeholders and understand the power dynamics of the stakeholders themselves. That's one of the elements in terms of approval. Conflict and issue management. We've all been here. We've came to realize that to be good, to being a good meeting facilitator and making sure that there is enough coffee and donuts. Again, we go to those coffee breaks just to interact with our stakeholders and ensure that our stakeholders, as a business analyst, are on our side. So, as business analyst, you are responsible to gain consensus on requirements well in advance of requesting from stakeholders to formally approve those requirements. So it's very important that everyone is aware and is in agreement of what it is that we are going to be approving going forward. It is also important that all conflict that is identified and is resolved prior to seeking any of their approval, because it is the role of the business analyst to continuously monitor and work with the stakeholders to resolve any issues or points where there may be conflicts. So when there's conflicts, there is a workshop required. I think we all know of this, because we put everyone together in one room and we address whatever it is that is a blocker in terms of going towards customer satisfaction. Okay. All right. Again, I've touched base on this. We, as a business analyst, you are responsible to ensure that prior to your approval, you get your stakeholders are comfortable and are in agreement with the requirements and the business value that it will generate. So it is, you cannot be having right at the end where everyone is saying, but I thought the value that you'll be gaining out of this is this, but it's no longer this. So it's always important as a business analyst, I think, especially in this day and age that is data driven, that you support your requirements with data such that you are able to measure your requirements once fulfilled, and the value that the business value that is gained is also measured with data. You have matrices that you can use to measure your the value that you have. If you look at, for example, I'll give you an example here of a business value would be increase in revenue as a business value, and the measure for business revenue in many other instances, especially in my context, it is your net promoter score, for example, where you are looking at your customer loyalty, where you are looking at who is referring your clients back to you. So a net promoter score would be used to just track your revenue. How much am I getting in terms of my client experience as well? That contributes to that revenue. Right. Then we track the communication and approval. Again, we need to be able to do this. We need, the business analyst is required to keep a record of all approvals and of all of the current state and the approval status. Stakeholders must be able to determine what requirements and designs are currently being approved and ready to progress to the next phase of the project. Again, from a prudential authority point of view, you need to show what requirements were approved, and you are able to have all those signatures signed to show that the business has applied their mind, or the stakeholders have applied the mind when it comes to the requirements themselves. All right. And that is the end of my session for today. I will then give it over to James. James, are you there?
I am
Thank you.
indeed. Thank you very much, Zweletu. I hope that everybody realized that Zweleto's just shared with you the easiest way to get promoted. And that is, if you actually trace your requirement properly, and if you keep your house in order, it's the easiest way to get promoted, because you know that your stakeholders are going to be in good hands when your replacement comes in behind you. So
absolutely,
thanks for sharing with us the secrets of getting promoted. I see that we have a couple of questions in the Q&A slot, so I'm just going to go through them quickly. Tulani asks, in your experience, how to manage the constant change in the prioritized requirements?
Wow, that's an amazing one. But as I said, it goes back to, again, to trace requirements where you are able to say which one is dependent on which one. Is this requirement going to give us value, number one? And also, what's the impact of the requirement on other requirements? Does it validate another requirement? Does it depend on another requirement? So it's important to have your trace requirement in order. You are able to see which requirement is impacting which other one. I hope that answers your question, but my colleagues can also add to that. Yeah.
Nani, are you happy with that one? You're going to let Zweleta get off that easily, hey? Nothing in the chat yet. Okay. Hasna asks, in terms of prioritization, based on your experience, how do you handle this with stakeholders?
I like that because I've touched base with it again. It goes back to that working agreement that I spoke about, where we are saying we have value that we want to gain as stakeholders. And at the end of that, the receiver of the value, it's not only the stakeholders, but also the customer. If you have conflicting requirements or conflicting priorities, then your barometer is always using the value that the customer is going to get. Which one is more important? Which one do we need to take to the customer when it comes to us as stakeholders, or the two requirements that are coming from those two, stakeholders? Which one is going to add value to that stakeholder with ease? I hope, Asna, I answered your question.
If I can add to that, Zuleti.
Yes, please.
In my experience, the hardest part about prioritization is to get our business stakeholders to not be lazy and say, I want all of it. Because that's being lazy. What I found personally works quite well is you say, yes, we're going to give you everything you want. But if there was one thing you could have right now, which one would it be? Just that one.
Yes.
Oh, no, I want everything. No, I know. We'll get everything done later. But which one do you want right now?
Now.
And then we can start, understanding why they have selected that. And there might be a whole range of reasons why that can be quite insightful. No. But you've got to hold the line.
Definitely.
Otherwise, there'll be laziness. I want everything.
We all want everything. I'm sure you've experienced that, Hasna, as well, that we want it now. We want it, in fact, yesterday. But there is that one thing. I agree with James.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's a nightmare. Stakeholders all the time. It's my nightmare.
Yes. The biggest problem that you have is when you're working on a project with competing stakeholders.
Yes.
Then it's better to make yourself some popcorn and get them in a room. And then you can watch them negotiate rather than going backwards and forwards and playing ping pong and be the person in the middle saying, no, this one is better than that one.
And but if you remember, Hasna, Hasna said, when there's conflict, a workshop is required. Just book a workshop, and everyone will be face to face and will be able to slug it out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you. Lesejo says, a lot of projects, especially data-driven ones, are agile instead of waterfall. How do we manage scope creep when a BRS is not required? So Letty, your Scrum Master is going to come out now.
Again, it comes back to the value on my side. When we are not, just because I think the best way in an agile, we're saying we will adopt to whatever changes that are coming in, as long as it adds value to the client and it does not conflict with any other requirement that is out there. I think for me that is the best way that I can handle that. It must add value in terms of priority. There is never scope creep, rather than whenever a new requirement comes in, you put it in the backlog, you prioritize it.
Sejo, does it answer your question?
I thought I saw.
I'm scrolling down quickly. Yes. Sorry, I'm scrolling backwards and forwards. Okay. The next question we had is from Lib, who says that they're a UX designer involved in a product from early in the software development lifecycle. Is it common for a designer to be part of the requirements elicitation? And if that is the case, how do you streamline this process?
I am not a UX designer, but I believe that if you're looking at it from an agile point of view, where you have an agile and a Scrum team, the UX specialist or the UX designer will form part of that team. And during the development of those requirements, they need to form part of whatever discussions. If there is a user story that is being developed, the UX designer will form part of that team. I'm not sure if that clears it up. But from a requirements traceability point of view, it is important to, as a UX designer, it is important to ensure that whatever changes that are happening on your design, you are able to manage your requirements, and you are able to trace your requirements whenever there's a change that is happening in them.
Also helps in the UX world where somebody says, no, it must be like that. And then 2 weeks later, they say, no, it must be this other thing. And
Yes.
then 8 weeks after that, said, no, go back to the way it was. And then you at least have a record of how they've changed their minds.
Yes. And also the
Okay.
cost implication of changing their minds as well.
Good.
Traceability.
Lalita says, this seems like a good solution in a matured environment. How do you instill similar techniques where you barely have time to complete your requirements, let alone get a traceability and constant update?
You're already doing it. I think you think the complexity of it. You're already doing it. The fact that the requirements are being documented. It's not a one liner. You are actually able to document your requirements. First of all, being able to document your requirements and store them at an accessible place is a starting point. Without adding any complexity. Hence, back in the day, we would just use a spreadsheet to be able to trace our requirements and be able to go back to that spreadsheet, which we called the traceability matrix, and we are able to trace the requirements. And there comes a time where you need to do testing. That's hence whenever we're doing the validation, that's the relationship that I spoke about. When there's validating of that requirements through testing through a test case, you use the same traceability matrix, which is in an Excel format.
Good. I see Alex asks a similar question. He says, I appreciate the effort. The presentation is quite insightful. Practicality is, organizational maturity plays a key differentiator. How do you practice such discipline and practice in an environment where the BA profession hasn't reached its fruition stage? Very similar to the previous question.
I like that question because I think James did, when we introduced the session, we spoke about the IIPA. As you can see in James' chest, he has his pin there as an IIPA member like me. Get your organization to subscribe to the IIPA, to get to sponsor your membership to the IIPA, because all of these things, once you are part of a member of the IIPA, you get the BA book electronic version for free. You are able to download it. James is fortunate to have a hard copy. You are able to get all of this information, and even the recordings that we have here. You are able to gain access to and be able to gain all of this knowledge and grow the competency in your business. For me, that would be the best advice, and then continue to practice.
Great, thank you. And then one last question is, would you say, from Anonymous, would you say running the project based on MVPs or minimum viable product is another approach of managing scope creep in the absence of a BRS?
Definitely. MVPs are important because they form part of the iterative approach. And back in the day, we used to do a proof of concepts, and the proof of concepts changed to MVPs, where you are able to document that MVP. Basically, your documentation is just limited to the MVP. Once you've done that initial MVP or the first MVP that you have, you move on to the next one. You document that, and the growth continues, and the product continues. The combination of those MVPs will then bring you your holistic product, and that's the key for me. It's the customer satisfaction. We can have all these fancy things, put them down, but if your customer is not happy, it kills the entire downward, it kills the entire upward process that are there. So you're documenting your MVP is key to ensure that you deliver value to your client. And protects you from scope creep as well.
Great. And we are at time for this evening's event. I'd like to thank Zwelethu for taking us through the requirements traceability chapter from the IIBA's business analysis body of knowledge. It's one of those foundation things that happens behind the scenes, and as you probably noticed, it's not a very flashy part of the work that we do, but it is so important for keeping our house in order. So
Yes.
thank you very much, Zwelethu.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys, for being a wonderful audience.
And we look forward to seeing you at the next Tools and Techniques session.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't know why
Thanks,
they turn off the
everyone.
lights here. Thank you very much. Cheers. Goodbye.
Goodbye.